Alright class, so I wanted to create this video for you just as another review resource about immigration policies, patterns, and trends in U.S. history to help prepare you for your quiz. Just to let you know, I'm about 50-50 whether or not this quiz will be an actual quiz grade or an actual classwork grade. I do expect it'll be open note for you. Chances are is that it might lock your Chromebook up. So you will want to do some review and studying on your own, or at least have key information written down on your notes. But one thing I will say is that when it comes to knowing specific events and specific policies, the only ones you'll have to know are the ones that I've put on that Quizlet review. I know there's many more that were in that interactive timeline besides that. The only specific events and policies you would need to know are on the Quizlet review. But I would make sure you have some form of notes available, but realize this quiz will most likely be locking your Chromebook screen, so have them available in a different way, whether that's on paper or on a separate device. So I just want to go through some of the key ideas from each time period in that graphic organizer. So first, 1492 to 1830, when it comes to the key ideas about immigrants and immigration here, I think the overall main theme is that during the early parts of colonial and then American history, the idea that the white man from Europe, specifically Western Europe, is the priority. And that if you are not one white, two from the western or maybe northern part of Europe, places like France, Britain, then you are deemed inferior compared to everybody else. So one way we can see that is through the transatlantic slave trade, which eventually gets removed and is made illegal, although slavery in this time period is not made illegal in the United States. But Africans being forced into slavery, Africans being seen as inferior, that's a key trend. And then also Native Americans with policies that forced them to leave the Indian Removal Act, in which Andrew Jackson, the Trail of Tears, all of this shows that the white man from Western Europe is the type of immigrant that the United States wants. And that if you are not white from that part of Europe, you are inferior, and you are either not wanted at all and you're forced to leave like the Native Americans, or you're only brought over to do work and are treated as subhuman. So those are some key ideas. In fact, they passed the Alien Sedition laws, which made it harder for immigrants to vote and also gave the government power to deport them if they wanted. So it's a very narrow view of immigration, just favoring white Europeans, specifically from Northern and Western Europe. For 1882 to 1924, what we have when it comes to ideas about immigrants and immigration is fear of immigrants from Asia, and specifically fear of immigrants from China. In fact, in the Chinese Exclusion Act, they were banned for 10 years, and this was extended even further beyond that, and eventually Chinese immigrants were forced to provide documentation of their legal status being in the United States, and if they did not have that, they would be thrown in jail. So that meant more deportations would possibly happen. In fact, certain Asian Americans were barred from coming to the United States whatsoever. In the 1917 Act of this green region here, which covers places like the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, India, other parts of Southeast Asia, this whole region was banned from coming to the United States at all. Also, this isn't discriminating against Asian immigrants, but more in other parts of Europe. So we favor North Europe, West Europe, but not Southeast Europe, because they had different culture, they had different religion. They did not like that. They were fearful of that culture and religion and viewed as inferior. So what they would do was force literacy tests for immigrants that Southeastern Europeans couldn't pass because they didn't have that language and culture. And that really discriminated against them from being able to come to the United States, and that's eventually going to hurt their ability to migrate to the United States later too. So in 1942 to 1953, the big event that takes place that shapes immigration policy is World War II. And it shapes it both in a way that restricts it and another way that welcomes it. So one clear way it restricts it is through Executive Order 9066 passed by President FDR, in which Japanese Americans were viewed as the enemy after Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was an attack from the Japanese, so Japanese Americans, even if they were legal citizens, were discriminated against whether they were perceived as, well, they were perceived as threats even if they were, or if they were completely innocent and very patriotic as Americans. Just for being Japanese, they were viewed as the enemy. So they would establish internment camps, they would throw them in jail after Pearl Harbor, and this was from Executive Order 9066, fear of the Japanese. Also, because of World War II, we welcome certain immigrants, specifically from Mexico, for the Bracero program, because as all these soldiers are leaving their jobs, we need people to fill those jobs that they left. So the Bracero program brought in Mexican immigrants to temporarily work, specifically in agricultural jobs, while people were away at war. That was meant to be on a temporary basis, but that's going to create the United States sees as problems later down the line. There's a reconnection with Chinese immigrants through the Magnuson Act, and also after World War II, we start accepting refugees, specifically Jews. But with that being said, we also have quota systems where there's only certain percentages of places that can come. So this was actually established in the time period before. Only a certain percentage of immigrants could come that were already living in the United States. So for example, if there's 10,000 Polish immigrants, only 2% more are allowed to come. So the more people you already had, the more people then could also join moving forward. Also, anybody who was looking to flee from communism, that was another type of refugee because we support democratic ideas. So if immigrants are trying to leave communism and join the democratic side of things, that's the type of immigrant the United States wants during this time. 1954 to 1986, we are flipping the script from the Bracero program to things like Operation Wetback. And wetback is a term that is racist, it is negative, it's not a term you should ever use. And that comes from this operation. This was the largest deportation in U.S. history, in which we take these Mexican immigrants and we, if they're undocumented, ship them back to Mexico. We also have the removal of the quota system after the civil rights movements of the 1960s, and instead, the type of immigrant we want is not based on a certain country, but based on one, are they skilled? Can they help us because they're skilled at work? Or two, do they have family here and they're separated from that family? So it's a shift in the type of immigrant we want from one being from a certain country with a certain culture to one, do they have skills and can we reunite families in that way? We're also accepting refugees from Laos and Vietnam, the Indochina Act, while still trying to get rid of undocumented immigrants out of our country and trying to come up with a clearer framework for what a refugee is. 1986 to 2001, what we have is continued focus on deporting and getting rid and cracking down on illegal undocumented immigration, trying to tighten up the border. We are also trying to focus more on, can we bring in skilled immigrants? Can we bring in immigrants separated from their families? But this time, we're adding diversity visas, a diversity lottery to try to increase the diversity of immigrant we have instead of it just coming from a certain country. So we're kind of flipping the approach from what it used to be in the very early days of immigration where we select from certain countries. Now we're trying to broaden it with more diversity, once again with that focus on, are they skilled? Have they been separated? There's also more pressure to stop undocumented immigrants coming from Mexico, from the southern border. So we're increasing the fencing on the southern border, which is going to continue moving forward. So in 2002-2015, the key event that shapes immigration is 9/11. right? And that happens in 2001. And right after 2001, there is significant fear to protect the border and promote national security. So several acts get passed in order to do this. One is the Patriot Act. This is post 9/11. This was to protect against terrorism. We have the Enhanced Border Security and Visa Entry Reform Act, Homeland Security Act, that creates the Department of Homeland Security, which has different branches that monitors the border and enforces immigration laws even today. Things like ICE, for example. Secure Fence Acts, which promotes more of the fencing, cameras, even satellites and drones along the southern border to prevent illegal immigration from happening. And then later, in the President Obama administration, try to open up a little bit more in the sense that we have DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which helps protect the rights of children who are born in the United States from illegal immigrant parents, and also trying to accept more refugees as there's a global refugee crisis with various problems all over the world taking place and people needing shelter and protection. So what starts off as securing the border, specifically under President Bush, it starts to change a little bit with President Obama, but it's going to change back one more time with what's happening right now under President Trump's administration. He is promoting a wall on the southern border. He's passed a handful of executive orders targeting Muslim-majority countries to protect our country from what is deemed as enemies and threats to our national security. There was, until Trump reversed this, a policy where they would separate families to try parents who are illegal immigrants. That got reversed due to public pressure because separating families isn't good. All of this is a little bit of a problem. So that's kind of the differences that we have. If you have questions about kind of the key approaches to what is being viewed about immigrants and about immigration in general, who is being targeted, why are they being targeted, what is the goal of immigration, either with what's being allowed versus what's not, let me know. Study the Quizlet, study the Kahoot. Let me know if you have questions. Be prepared for Monday's quiz.